Welcome to The Keep, the Employee Experience Podcast. Your host, Greg Weiss, brings together experts from around the world sharing their insights on creating amazing employee experiences. Having the wrong attitude about their people can cost businesses a fortune. Having the right attitude will build success. Over to you, Greg.
Thanks, Angela. Humans are primates and therefore a social species. We have a number of hardwired instincts. Andrew O'Keefe is an author of a book on the subject, and in this interview we learn that when employers understand human instincts, it creates the foundations of a powerful employee experience. Hey, I'm Greg Weiss and welcome to the Keep podcast, all about the employee experience, and I'm here in studio with Andrew O'Keefe. Andrew is a fascinating man. He is the director of Hardwired Humans and helps organisations align their leadership practices to human instincts. Andrew, just a little bit, just tell us a short summary of your background.
So I started life in industrial relations in mining and manufacturing, and then 10 years with IBM, worked with Optus and a few other organisations, and along the way I was just fascinated by issues that consistently appear in organisational life, and so that's been a search for answers to do with making workplaces more constructive.
Fantastic. So just as we go into some things now, I just want to start diving into some of your areas of expertise, and let's set the scene. We're going to talk about human instincts and how human instincts help with developing a powerful employee experience. But before we go into the employee experience, give us a snapshot of the subject of human instincts for leadership and HR practices.
Workplaces are not our natural habitat, and this gives a lot of insight into why people think and act the way they do, and then what can leaders do about that knowledge, because human behaviour can tend to be a bit of a mystery and unpredictable, and to solve that puzzle, the answer is that it's only ever so recently in human history that we moved from being hunter-gatherers and villagers, and beginning in the Western world with the Industrial Revolution, we moved into offices and factories, and 250 years is no time to alter what it means to be human. So to understand human nature in this framework of human instincts is understanding the behaviours that emerged in our ancestral setting and that still show themselves in workplaces.
And offices can be real jungles and
can't
terrible
they be?
places. They really
That's
can
right.
be. How does the knowledge of human instincts guide leaders in their employee experience?
Well, there's three key areas. One of them is the design of the workplace, like the team in which people work and the department. The second is team harmony. And the third is around understanding the individual's identity of people who work with us.
Great. So we're going to talk first off about organisational design. Let's define what organisational design means.
Yeah, it means designing a workplace to be functional. It's like if we're an engineer and we're designing buildings to be functional, or we're traffic engineers and we're going to design road systems to be functional. And in organisational design, we can design workplaces to be functional based on natural human principles. And what's handy to know about that is if we deviate from those natural principles, then unknowingly, we wouldn't do it deliberately, unknowingly we might be designing dysfunction into the working environment.
Interesting point. And so why do you name organisational design as the very first principle?
Yes, because it shows the lever that we can pull to make sure that even before we think about how we act in the system or how leaders lead in the system or what the employee experience will be, that we've actually pulled the lever of design to give it its best chance for people to fit in and feel part of something and to do their good work. Because if we deviate, then people will do their best work. They'll try, they're professional, they'll try to do their best work, but we might have actually designed it to be hard for them.
So what are the building blocks for organisation design that influence the employee experience?
So there's two size groups to which we feel our sense of identity, and bear in mind that we are a social being, and so being part of a social group is really critical. And the two size groups to which we gain our sense of identity is our family unit within our clan ancestrally. So human societies have always been built on small family units, numbering around about 7 or thereabouts. So historically that might have been a grandparent, mum, dad and a few kids. The same size group, by the way, appears in work groups. like ancestrally Bushmen in the Kalahari, they might have lived in a group of 25 to 30 people. But when they went to work, that is hunting, or not hunting, but gathering fruits and nuts and the like, then they went generally in groups of 5, 6 or so people. They didn't go as a group of 30. And so we feel this sense of identity, first of all, in our family units. So the principle number 1 in design would be to have people in work teams numbering roughly about 7. That is 5, 6, 7, 8 people. So a manager with minimum 4 direct reports up to a maximum of 8. Now, if we deviate much from that size team, if we have 12 people in a team, 15, then it's just too large to feel part of something. The group will start to fracture, let alone for the manager to try to service a big team of 12, 15 or 20 people.
Right.
So that was group number 1. And then beyond that is our clan group, which historically might have been our band, it might have been our village. And that size group will number up to about 150 people. It might be 30 people in a department, 80, 100, but not much more than about 150.
And so if these 2 design principles are so critical and natural for humans, then presumably traditional human communities display these principles.
Yeah, and so the second example would be on that, the 150 or so, up to about 150. So I've visited various cultures, and like the Himba people in Namibia, herders who live in villages, their villages number up to about 50 or so individuals. They don't have really big villages. There was an anthropologist who studied the Yanomamo culture in Venezuela in the 60s, and he kept running into villages. In some cases, he was making first contact with villages, and this is way back in the 60s. He never found a village bigger than 150.
Wow, that's amazing. It's an amazing dynamic. I'm just curious, what happens after 150?
Yeah, and so to quote this guy, Chagnon, he says, beyond about 150, it's too big to hold together. That the leader, the leadership group, there's just too much internal politics and it starts fracturing and then groups will split off. And I should say that nowadays there's the research based on Robin Dunbar's work out of Oxford that's found that this 150 relates to the size of our brain. So there's a really good reason. We're a brainy, that's brain per body size, we're a brainy species, and we can handle the complexity of being part of and fitting in with a group of a certain size up to about 150.
And then?
And then it just will fracture, it'll break. So in organisational life, people want to feel part of something. They're not going to feel part of a group of 500. So the recommendation on department numbers, subsidiary locations, would be just using this force of nature, build from a department of 80 to 100 people, and then thousands of people, organisations of 1,000, 10,000, 20,000 should be built from that human magnitude. People aren't going to feel part of 1,000 or 10,000. They can feel, and therefore the employee engagement or the employee experience can be really strong if people feel part of a team and part of a department.
That brings me on to the next question, team harmony. You mentioned principle number 2 from Human Instincts is group harmony. What do you mean specifically?
Given that we're a social being, we want to feel part of an actual functional group. This criticality of we're a social being. Jude, my wife and I have just visited the Falkland Islands.
Yeah, amazing.
And there's a species of seals called the elephant seals.
Mm-hmm.
The elephant seals are not particularly social, and if we look at the bull elephants, they come to land. They're with others of their species for about 6 weeks a year, and the rest of the year the bulls are on their own in the ocean. Now that's not us. They don't have a need for social belonging, coming to work and fitting in. We're social. We have been through human history. And so fitting in and therefore team harmony is really critical to a really good employment experience. You can't imagine, and I think we've all, different places we've worked, I've worked at places where it felt like the work team was a family, that is a functional family. There's others that you didn't feel a great, sense of wanting to be there and the like. And that's to do with team harmony, so that people can pretty well come to work, do their job, be themselves, fit in, everybody gets on okay. If you go out for lunch and coffee, You don't have to be too careful about whether your closest friend on the team's going and whether we can sit together. Everybody's getting on pretty well.
And the company's not employing any bull seals.
Yeah, that's just as well, I think. Or maybe, that would lead a different leadership action, wouldn't it? In that one, you could show the employee their desk, you could get them started on their work, you could show them the facilities, and that's your leadership duty done. We don't have that option.
And that would be an amazing employee experience, wouldn't it? Not. So what are some key actions leaders should adopt?
One critical one is that the nature of being a social species is that we need to groom in order to bond. For teams to be harmonious, people need to gauge in a healthy level of bonding, if you like, grooming. Now, every social species grooms. So the chimps, for instance, who live, by the way, in groups of up to about 50 because they're not quite as brainy. They're a very brainy species, not quite as brainy as us. So they can't handle much bigger groups than about 50. But in a group of 50, you'd expect a fair bit of grooming going on, which is sitting around and physically grooming. And it's only by grooming that individuals have a sense of connection. And for us, we don't groom physically. We groom through chit-chat. We have this incredible vocal capability. Like, think in terms of our vocal capability and language, how enhanced that is to any other species. And one of the incredible ways in which we use that is to bond, and we do so by chit-chat. So those people, obviously our friends or people who we're working with, we can only bond through chit-chat.
Right. So just let's hold it there for a moment, because we're going to come back after the break. What we'll do is we'll talk about chit-chat and grooming.
Eagle Ways Radio, the voice of small business.
People come and go in organisations all the time, and while that's normal, high employee turnover can be expensive. Greg Weiss and Career Support 365 have structured onboarding and offboarding services. They create the foundation for long-term success, protecting the employer and brand while helping people perform at their best and fit in quickly. Start strong, finish strong. To find out more, go to careersupport365.com.
Okay, so welcome back, and we were talking about grooming. And I'm glad to know that grooming isn't on a physical level, clearly in the workplace. It's at a verbal level. Let's continue that discussion.
So every social species grooms, and for us it's in the form of chit-chat. Now, chit-chat in the workplace it's a really broad subject. It's any topic other than task, technical, project update, sales plan, pipeline reviews and the like. And the critical thing is that we can only bond through grooming, through chit-chat. Chit-chat includes, obviously, personal interests and hobbies and the like, but also a good level of work chit-chat. Like if you've got a friend and you're at a meeting and something came up that your friend needs to know, well, that's work chit-chat. You'd go back and say, hey, Greg, buddy, something just came up and something you need to know, or something I observed, or something I heard, or something in the corridor. So that's a healthy level of chit-chat, and we can only be bonded through chit-chat. And so for the employment experience and for leaders to set the environment in which people do want to be part of the team, part of the organisation, then leaders and obviously teams as well need to engage in a good level of chit-chat with each other.
And so intuitively this sounds right. So what's the research supporting this proposition?
Yeah, so again, if we talk about, so Robin Dunbar at Oxford is the leader in terms of chit-chat, and what he's found, and one of his studies shows the difference, the amount of chit-chat that humans in our ancestral setting needed to engage in based on, again, our group size and our brain. So chimps, again, for instance, they engage, and this is both Dunbar's work and Dr. Jane Goodall's work. So chimps engage in about 15% of their day is grooming. So after they've foraged for food, which is the number one daily activity, they'll sit around for a fair part of their day, 15 or so % of the day, given their group size number, and hang out grooming.
That's a lot of grooming.
That's a lot of grooming. There was one chimp at Taronga Zoo, two chimps at Taronga Zoo who were never seen grooming. That's okay, they weren't friends. And this was in a group of about 20 chimps at Taronga Zoo in Sydney, until both these adult females had a baby at roughly the same time. They were then, while the kids were playing, sat around grooming for about the 5 years in which the kids were close to them and on their hands. And then once the kids were more independent and running around, then the keepers never saw those two grooming again.
Mother's group in chimp version. Right. Amazing.
And then for humans in our ancestral setting, don't try this number at work. To hold groups together in our ancestral setting, people spent about 40% of their day grooming. That sounds pretty scary, but in ancestral setting, that apparently wasn't too hard. Food was pretty plentiful. Take again the Bushmen in the Kalahari, where it only took about 2.5, 3 days of work per week to get enough food, that is calories, to survive. And of course, because we groom with our voice, we're not limited to grooming physically with our hands. And so we could be gathering foods and nuts and there's still pretty much time for a chit-chat. When you're moving from one nut tree to another, there's plenty of time grooming. You sit around the village or the camp grooming. There was plenty of time grooming. And so the critical thing for leaders is we need to spend enough time in chit-chat.
I think that's a really interesting distinction, because often leaders will find that they're only talking task. And so this gives people permission to talk to each other about individuals, about really getting to know the true human being.
Yeah, and just having enough water cooler conversations in team meetings to have enough healthy chit chat to have enough interactions, coffees together and the like. And the critical thing, and in this case, by talking about this, we've removed the option of ignorance, haven't we? That if leaders who deny this, then they're denying or ignoring the criticality of bonding for a positive employee experience.
Absolutely. And giving people the permission to do this, in fact, giving them the encouragement to do this, albeit not the whole day, but you said, what, 40%?
Well, that's in our ancestral setting, so we wouldn't try that at work, but it says...
More like a chimp level of 15.
Maybe, isn't it?
Let's go on to individual identity. Principle number 3 you referred to is knowing people's identity. Please expand on that.
So we have this sense of self. We're not sure how many species, but we don't think, the scientists think there's many species that have a sense of self, and that's only by a sense of myself that I can see other selves. And that's partly about theory of mind. We think and wonder about what other people are thinking and feeling and what their motivations are. So we can't be treated as a robot. A leader, to give someone a really positive employment experience, can't treat people like a number. Then we need to know enough about the other person to know them, to know their identity. And so you need to know their story, their background, to treat them as an individual. And you just can't imagine a positive employment experience and a passionate employee experience without respecting and knowing people's identity. And along the way, through our careers, we have experiences which give us clarity about that. And my anti-manager story is one managing director I worked for. At this time, Jude and I went on a lovely 5-week holiday to Europe. And coming back that first Monday morning, every Monday morning we had an executive meeting. That first Monday morning back, the only thing this guy, we'll call him Frank because that was his real name, the only thing Frank said to me, looking across the table of the executive room, was, "Andrew, something came up while you were away. We need to catch up."
Right.
And
good empathy skills.
And all I'm saying is he didn't have, even if he didn't remember that we'd been to Europe, that would have been okay. Just an acknowledgement, welcome back, or how was your holiday? I've been away for 5 weeks. All I'm saying is he didn't have from me that passionate following. Of course you do your best work, you're a professional, but there was something energetic missing because of his dispassionate, disrespectful, not knowing me and respecting my identity.
Yeah. It's just fantastic skills that he had. Towards the end, I assume you'll find some leaders question this need. Do some leaders think that there is a line between work and personal?
Yeah, they do, and but it causes them to challenge, and I'm pleased to say review that approach. That people say to me later, and this might be several weeks or months later, based on these principles, that either they might say, yeah, I associated catching up with people or chit-chat with wasting time, or I thought there was this line between work and personal, but I can see that approach that I have had a negative implication on my relationships and on my leadership effectiveness. And so people do make the shift based on this awareness of what makes us tick as humans.
And so that's a huge learning for me when we've had our discussions about how I could be a better leader as well. So just wrapping up here, what's one action for leaders on this point that you just made?
Yes, on the individual identity one, I recommend that leaders should know 5 things about somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Five things. Just make the leader should, and work colleagues, you should decide for you what are the 5 things. For me, the 5 things that I wanted to know about people I worked with. So one was their family setting. That's obviously a key part of our identity. Their work experience, their basic life story. I mean, that's really curious, and that informs the person that grows up to be the person who's working with you. So their career experience. I like to know about their aspirations and what their motivations are, and of course interest and hobbies.
Interesting. So good 5 levels. That makes for a very meaningful conversation that you can have, and quite a nice way of connecting with an individual. I've had a wonderful time with Andrew today on the Keep, the Employee Experience podcast. A huge amount that we've covered today and some very, very helpful tips. Thank you, Andrew.
Pleasure, Greg.
Thank you for listening to another podcast produced by Eagle Waves Radio. For more amazing podcasts, go to our website, eaglewavesradio.com.au. You can like us on Facebook and, of course, follow us on Twitter. Ever thought of having your own podcast? We can help.